Welcome back to AI for Her Business. I'm Natalia, and today I'm genuinely excited because we're talking about one thing most people skip in AI rush, the people side. My guest today is Dr. Mariam Moussa. She's a principal consultant with 20 years experience across aviation, healthcare, corporate, and education. Organizations like Air New Zealand, Melbourne Airport, Monash University, and Epworth Healthcare. She holds PhD in organizational psychology, and her whole approach is about translating complexity into clarity, which is exactly what our listeners need. Mariam, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thanks, Natalia, for this lovely introduction. I am an independent organizational change consultant with a strong background in org psychology. I'm based in Melbourne, in Australia, and my work sits at the intersection of systems level change, leadership, and human centered design. So that's how I would sum up all the work that I do. A few things that specifically define what I do professionally is that I operate at the strategic end and I add value around the discernment of systems thinking and understanding how organizations actually resist or absorb change.
With your background in organizational psychology, when change involves AI, how would change management be tailored?
The biggest error that I see with change management approach to AI is treating it as if it's technology implementation, because it isn't. It's a professional identity disruption. People aren't just going to be learning how to use a new tool, whatever that tool is. They're being asked to redefine what their individual competence means at work. And that requires a completely different intervention logic. I lean on a framework called the AMO Framework. That's AMO. It stands for Abilities, Motivation, and Opportunity. It's a theoretical framework commonly used within HR management practices as well as organizational change practices. When you're introduced to something as disruptive as AI, it creates a lot of fear and it collapses all three dimensions. It makes people doubt their ability to adapt. It makes them lose motivation because the psychological contract between the individual and the organization, which is that implicit agreement about what they're actually there to do, it feels like it's being broken. And the structures that usually provide opportunity collapse as well, because then people don't have the chance to experiment with this new technology safely. So any AI change architecture needs to address all three in parallel, not sequentially. You don't go one, two, three. You have to look at the whole thing at the same time. The fear around job security is often a proxy for something a lot deeper. In my opinion, that's a fear of becoming irrelevant. It's not really about the AI. It's not really about the job. It's actually about you feeling that your contribution will lose relevance. And so the intervention here from a change management perspective, it can't be about just providing reassurance, telling people everything will be fine. It's about reframing the conversation. A really good question to ask here is what becomes more valuable when AI handles routine cognitive work? What is it about your particular role that increases in value and therefore needs to become more visible? Is it human judgment? Is it sort of social intelligence or the relational aspects of work? Is it ethical discernment? And I think this is going to be a big one, is what happens when the process where decisions are being made are no longer a human responsibility? And of course, being able to look back, but also look forward into the future and analyze that within the present moment in today's context and what that actually means. Most change leaders need to be able to articulate that concretely and in a way that is role specific so that people feel that there is a open and honest conversation and that there's a genuine renegotiation of that value exchange. I am here to do a job and my job is changing, but that doesn't take away from my value as a person. It doesn't make me irrelevant. It just changes how I need to work and how I need to increase my visibility and my contribution and the value that I add. That AI anxiety or sort of job security and fear around it can be alleviated. It's for us to approach
Mm.
it differently and to talk about it more openly. Mm.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is we need to let people redefine their roles,
Yes.
find their value,
Yeah.
understand that that value has been acknowledged
Yes.
by their leadership, by the organization that they work for,
Yeah.
and realign back into the future and potentially even acknowledge that their experience today will be still valuable in the
That's right.
future.
That's right. And it's about providing the opportunities for people to experiment and to play
Yes.
and to do so
Yes.
safely, to be able
Yes.
to try new things and to fail and to make suggestions on how the introduction and the implementation of AI into their work ecosystem can
Yes.
benefit not just themselves but the teams and the wider group. I think when
Yeah.
that opportunity exists, everybody wins.
This is already so valuable. I'm learning myself as well. So I thank you for that. One of the biggest debates when it comes to change management is about the approach. So we keep hearing, top down, bottom up, mixed, hybrid. Um, which approach do you think works well for
Yeah.
small businesses that are currently actively pursuing those opportunities?
But I love that question. And I remember you and I met around a conversation that was quite similar to this,
Yes.
whether it was about what works better, is it top down or bottom up. The way I would think about it is when you're trying to decide what approach fits best, you're essentially trying to diagnose the immune response before you prescribe what approach you're going to take. So the question isn't which model is theoretically better, it's which one will survive contact with your particular change. There's three lenses that I like to take here. Number one, I look at the power setup or the power architecture. Where does legitimate authority actually sit in your business or in your organization? What is the difference between the hierarchy that we have set up structurally and the actual real lived hierarchy within the organization? To put it bluntly, if a senior leader lacks credibility with frontline staff, then top-down mandates will be rejected. At a psychological level, people will just kind of do what they have to do from a compliance point of view, but they won't have adopted the change. And so where is the power architecture within your business? Is your structure reflective of where hierarchy actually sits? Is your leadership actually respected and followed and listened to? The second lens that I would look at is change history, or sort of the history of change within your business. What have you done in the past that's been rejected? Have you taken a prior top-down approach that has failed the initiative that you tried to put in place? Because whatever's happened in the past, that history will activate a memory for that organization, and it will control how people respond to a similar approach. One of the things that I tend to listen out for when I sort of kick off a new engagement is people saying things like, oh, we've tried something like this before and it didn't work, it failed. We're a bit skeptical that this will work as well. Change history is really important. And then the last thing is urgency and coherence. If a initiative is genuinely time critical and is strategically quite coherent with where the company has to go, then your top-down approach is 100% justified. However, if the change is a little bit ambiguous, you're still in your exploratory phase, it's complex, but we're still trying to figure it out, then local adaptation is the way to go, which means you will almost always require bottom-up seeding. In practice, the answer is that it will almost always be a blended approach, but the sequencing is what matters. Top down will help you establish the why and the non-negotiables, and then the bottom up will help you design the how and surface any friction points that the leadership can't see from a high altitude. I can usually tell if an organization got it wrong when change champions or people that are actually driving the initiatives are appointed by management as opposed to emerging from a trust network. Appointed champions or appointed advocates often produce what I like to call a compliance theater. I see that in highly regulatory environments, whether it's hospitals or airports, but it also happens in small businesses where you bring in someone from the outside. People just kind of look and perform compliance as opposed to actually change things. The first thing I do is I try to find emergent advocates. Where are your emerging leaders? Who here truly believes in the message that people trust, that people follow, that has that social capital within the organization, that kind of reflects the true power hierarchy within the business? Once we
Mhm.
find those people, then that whole approach of do we go top down first or bottom up first, and how much of each becomes very, very clear.
The best thing you can do is, first of all, understand the organization you're dealing with. Then, once you do have some champions assigned, hopefully volunteering, you can keep an open mind and
Yeah.
see what emerges. Because in my experience, also, those champions, you don't have to go very far to find them. They will
Yes.
make themselves known most of the time. If they
Exactly.
really, really want to support something,
Yeah.
they will be there and they would want to have a conversation with you.
Yeah. I like to call this the work before the work. And it's something that a lot of organizations that I've worked with don't anticipate. I say, okay, there's a body of work that needs to happen before the actual work starts. And this body of work is about finding those people. It's about getting the pulse of the organization, understanding where does power actually sit. And this is especially important when if I think about the companies or the businesses that will be most affected by AI, they tend to have teams or individuals that could be completely removed from their repertoire of tasks. And these people can be marginalized in ways that are not immediately visible. To have a really fair approach, we need to understand who they are, what they need, what values they add. You can't do that as part of the initiative. It's the work before the work. It has to happen before you actually start thinking about planning for implementing a change initiative.
Do you think this approach changes when the organization is smaller and it's 10 to 20 people? Does it become easier or does it become harder?
That's an interesting question because it becomes logistically easier, but it's harder because you're working with such limited numbers of people. Logistically easier because you don't have to interview 20, 30, 40 people, but you do need to quickly understand the dynamic of that business, figure out what people need in a short amount of time, and be able to read between the lines. That's where I find the difficulty is in getting enough people tell you about something that thing
Yeah.
becomes a theme. It becomes
Statistically, it's going to be
yeah.
statistically relevant.
With a small company, it's harder to find the truth because
Mm.
there are limited sources of truth and numbers don't support it. You have to orchestrate or kind of put together a narrative that makes sense for the people in the group. You have to listen better and you have to get closer to the business. I'm working with a business at the moment that employs 13 people, and they are frantically trying to understand how AI will change their business. I'm involved in trying to understand how do they want to work in the future with this constant disruption to how they do business. How can they communicate better with one another and get closer to one another professionally so that they can weather the storm of the constant changes? And I think this is really important in order to harness and build psychological safety within a team where the psychological threat is external, but can also start to feed internal issues. It has required that I get a lot closer to the team because it's such a small team. Mm.
When you walk into those new environments and small businesses or large organizations, which factors do you look at to determine how difficult change management will be?
My go-to factors that I like to lean on is first and foremost, figure out what is the distance between the culture and the values of the organization says it has and the lived culture. The greater that distance, the more challenging any change is going to be because it means there's a lot of fixing that needs to happen before change can be implemented successfully. And that's because you're having to surface and bring out things that are embedded in the culture that could have an adverse effect. The second factor, the quality of their middle managers or emergent leadership level. If you have senior leaders, they authorize it and they endorse it. Frontline workers or the people are effectively on the receiving end of that change. They're going to be experiencing it. Your middle managers are that connective tissue. They're the ligaments that are holding it all together. If they're overwhelmed, quietly skeptical, they don't really believe in the change, then I know that there's going to be stalling in that layer. Some organizations don't have that middle tier, but there's someone who's performing that middle management. You and I know that change fatigue is real, but it's also cumulative, right? If an organization has been through multiple restructures and system migrations, and I'm just thinking of a particular organization, there was so much change in the year before. They had a couple of restructures at the highest levels, including fundamental structural changes in the middle. They had a massive system migration that had huge hiccups, and it wasn't a seamless process. They were also undergoing a merger. What it did to that company is you ended up with an entire organization of people that had a sense of a learned helplessness towards new initiatives. It wasn't even resistance. Resistance was too active. And so
looking at,
yeah, they were just exhausted. I had to quickly reposition myself because I'm not coming into an energized organization. I'm coming into a fatigued organization. And so assessing that history before that work was really, really important. My approach is always about qualitatively sensing what's going on within the organization to understand how much activation energy is going to be required to invest before we can even begin the substantive work. Those are the key things. The first thing is the distance between the actual culture and the culture that they say they have. The second thing is the quality of their middle management as that transmission layer. And then the organization's prior relationship would change.
Would you do something with the mid layer to get them activated, or would you go about it a different way?
It will largely depend on what's actually going on with the middle layer and what level of intervention is required. Is it around their ability, their motivation, or is it about opportunity? And I would co-design an intervention that would help alleviate some of their pain points, introduce a way to prepare them, or given the right tools and the right power, I say it 3 times, to affect the change. It could be something as simple as setting up a regular cadence of a working group that includes this group of people that shows that they are an important part of the change itself. If you can give us maybe top 5 key considerations that business owners can, take away and use, what would those 5 key considerations be? You can almost say this is my philosophy of how to approach these things. The first thing is to always start with the system, not with the symptom. Resistance to change is almost never irrational. It's always information. If you use that information to design interventions and to map the system, you get such a clear strategic picture from the beginning. The second thing is to design for the psychological contract, not just the workflow or the process. Every employee, every person, whether it's a big company or a small company, they hold an implicit agreement about what they give and what they receive. There is a psychological contract that tells them what value they add. Any significant change, including AI, will disrupt that contract. And acknowledging it explicitly can help people adapt really well. And then protect the middle managers, emerging leaders, champions. They are where change lives and dies. Business owners will really see value by protecting that layer. It's about sequencing it correctly and ensuring that there is adoption across the board. Implementation metrics tend to track usage, cost efficiency, but they rarely track whether people feel more capable, trusted, connected. I think these are things that are really important.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Mariam. What would be one thing first they can do tomorrow after this conversation?
Start small, have a conversation that you've been avoiding. Specifically, find someone that you work with or that you think is like quietly resistant and ask them a question. Try to have a conversation about it. What would make it workable for them? Their perspective is data, it's information. It's not obstruction. It helps you understand people's views. It broadens your perspective and your knowledge base about what you can do, especially if you're in a leadership position. You want to be able to have your ear to the ground as close as possible.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. Where can people find you?
Follow me on LinkedIn. I've got my website as well. Anyone interested in really understanding systems level thinking, look up my writing on the topic, especially around culture shift within organizations.
I think what we'll do is, if you don't mind, is I'll link some of those as well.
It'd be wonderful. Thank you so much, Natalia.
Thank you, Mariam.